I never thought a folded piece of paper hidden inside an old military footlocker could destroy an entire corruption scheme. But that's exactly what happened. My name is Emily Carter, and this story begins on a cold October morning when my father lost the ranch that had been in our family for nearly 70 years. Dad, William Carter, was a decorated Army veteran. He'd served 2 tours overseas, came home with a Purple Heart, and spent the rest of his life building a cattle ranch in western Texas. The ranch wasn't huge by Texas standards. Just over 800 acres. But it was ours. Every fence post. Every windmill. Every dusty trail. Dad knew every inch of that land. So when a county official showed up at our gate with a foreclosure notice claiming thousands of dollars in unpaid property taxes, I thought there had to be some mistake. Dad thought so too. He pulled out receipts. Bank statements. Tax records. Everything showed the payments had been made. Yet somehow the county's records claimed otherwise. The official barely looked at the documents. He simply handed Dad another notice and told him he had 30 days to appeal. 30 days. For a 72-year-old veteran who had never missed a payment in his life. We hired an attorney. He filed the appeal immediately. But every time he requested county records, the answers became stranger. Payment records were missing. Files had disappeared. Documents that should have existed simply didn't. Then the appeal was denied. No explanation. No hearing. No review. Just denied. 3 months later the ranch was scheduled for auction. Dad sat on the porch that evening staring across the pasture. I had never seen him look defeated before. Not after military service. Not after droughts. Not after cattle losses. But that night he looked broken. They've already decided, he told me quietly. They just haven't admitted it yet. I wanted to tell him he was wrong. But deep down, I feared he was right. The auction happened on a Tuesday morning. Only 3 bidders appeared. That alone seemed suspicious. 800 acres of Texas ranchland should have attracted dozens of investors. Instead, only 3. And one of them won almost immediately. A businessman named Richard Langford. The ranch sold for less than half its market value. Half. Within an hour, ownership was transferred. Within a week, survey crews were walking the property. Within 2 weeks, Langford's company had construction vehicles parked near the northern pasture. Everything happened too fast. Far too fast. Dad moved into a small rental house in town. The ranch was gone. The cattle were sold. The barns emptied. And the life he'd spent decades building disappeared. For months afterward he barely spoke. Then one rainy Saturday, I drove over to help clean out some remaining boxes stored in his garage. Most were old military keepsakes. Photographs. Letters. Maps. Equipment. Nothing unusual. Until I opened an old green Army footlocker. At the very bottom sat a weathered leather tube. Inside was a rolled map. Yellow with age. Covered in survey markings. At first I thought it was just another property survey. Then I noticed a handwritten note. Mineral Rights Reservation Agreement. Dated 1954. My grandfather's signature appeared at the bottom. I froze. Because I knew enough about Texas land law to understand what that meant. Surface ownership and mineral ownership can be separated. Whoever owned those mineral rights could control enormous value beneath the land. Oil. Gas. Natural resources. I immediately called our attorney. An hour later he was staring at the document in complete silence. Then he looked up. Where did you find this? In Dad's footlocker. His expression changed instantly. Emily, this changes everything. Apparently, decades earlier, my grandfather had sold part of the ranch while retaining all mineral rights beneath the property. Those rights had never been transferred. Never surrendered. Never terminated. And according to the map, the mineral rights covered the exact section where Langford's crews had started surveying. The attorney launched an investigation. Within days he uncovered something shocking. Langford's company wasn't planning a cattle operation. They weren't building homes. They weren't developing commercial property. They had been negotiating with an energy company before the auction even happened. Before the auction, geological surveys suggested valuable deposits beneath the ranch, potentially worth millions. Suddenly everything made sense. The missing tax records, the rushed foreclosure, the bargain auction, the limited bidders, the county's refusal to review evidence. Someone knew what was underground. And someone wanted the land badly. The attorney filed an emergency lawsuit. This time things moved quickly. Very quickly. The judge ordered county records produced. Under oath. Without delay. What emerged over the next several weeks stunned everyone. Internal emails revealed communication between county officials and individuals connected to Langford's business partners. Property records had been altered. Payment entries had been removed. Not accidentally. Deliberately. Even worse, several county employees admitted they had been instructed not to investigate discrepancies. The foreclosure had never been about taxes. The taxes were simply the excuse. The real target was the mineral rights. News reporters began showing up. State investigators got involved. Public hearings were scheduled. Suddenly the story was everywhere. The decorated veteran. The suspicious foreclosure. The hidden mineral rights. People were furious. Then came the hearing that changed everything. The courtroom was packed. Journalists filled every seat. County officials sat nervously behind their attorneys. Dad sat beside me. Quiet as always. The judge reviewed the evidence for nearly 2 hours. Then he issued his ruling. The foreclosure was invalid. The auction was invalid. The transfer of ownership was invalid. Every action taken against the ranch was reversed. Just like that. The ranch legally belonged to Dad again. I looked over at him. For a moment he simply stared forward. Almost as if he hadn't heard. Then tears appeared in his eyes. The first I'd seen since I was a child. The courtroom erupted. But the story wasn't over. Investigators continued digging. Several officials lost their jobs. Criminal charges followed. Langford's company became the subject of multiple state investigations. The energy deal collapsed completely. And the county eventually agreed to a substantial settlement with Dad for damages. People often ask if the money changed his life. The truth is, getting the ranch back mattered far more. 3 months after the ruling, Dad and I stood near the old windmill overlooking the property. The sun was setting across the same fields he'd worked for decades. The fences were being repaired. The cattle were returning. The ranch was alive again. Dad looked out over the land and smiled. You know, he said, they thought the valuable thing was buried underground. I laughed. Wasn't it? He shook his head. No. Then he pointed toward the horizon. The valuable thing was always right here. For a long moment neither of us spoke. The wind rolled through the grass. The cattle moved slowly across the pasture. And the ranch that corruption had nearly stolen stood exactly where it always had. Waiting for its family to come home. Sometimes justice arrives through lawyers. Sometimes through judges. And sometimes it arrives folded inside an old military footlocker, hidden beneath decades of dust, waiting for the right person to finally open it.